Now, a decade after the Chibok schoolgirls kidnapping, Nigeria grapples with a widespread kidnapping crisis that has evolved beyond targeting schools to encompass entire communities, students of all levels, and highway travelers. Boko Haram's initial use of school abduction as a terror tactic has opened the door for other criminal groups to adopt similar strategies.
Now, since 2019, Nigeria has witnessed over 735 mass abductions involving more than 15,000 victims. The year 2024 alone has seen at least 68 mass abductions, primarily in states like Kaduna, Zamfara, Katsina, which face increasing banditry. Now, motivations for kidnappings vary by region, with economic factors, weak security infrastructure, and institutional corruption contributing to the factors, or rather to this crisis. Now, the persistency of the kidnapping epidemic highlights the failure of the state to ensure the safety and security of its citizens.
Now, joining us to discuss these pertinent issues regarding security, we're joined by McHarry, Senior Security Analyst, SBM Intelligence. McHarry, you're welcome, or should I say Confidence? I like McHarry. Good to have you here.
Thank you for joining us. Now, let's get started, shall we? We were able to highlight some of the factors, but I would like for you to help us, because we understand that, SBM Intelligence did something, over, which is, I think the period in view was all the way down. Yeah, yes, thank you so much. So what factors have contributed to the evolution of Nigeria's kidnapping crisis, from targeting schoolgirls that we saw in 2014 to encompassing, broader demographies and even regions as well of the country?
To start with, you have to, first of all, deal with the problem of state capacity. Over the years, we at SBM have been calling out Nigeria's weak state capacity and its inability to enforce its will on not just its territory, but on the people. So as a result, armed groups have seen that they can piece away at Nigeria's territory and get away with it. So they are going in for the jugular, they are going in for the kill. So in 2014, it started with the targeting of schoolgirls. And then I think in the same period, we had the Mubi massacre in Adamawa State. And then between 2014 and 2018, there was the Dapchi abduction, which they kidnapped close to about 200 schoolgirls in Yobe State. But over the years, we've seen the metastasization of the violence moving away from one particular region in the northeast and then moving westward. For something we have also discovered at SBM is that the bulk of Nigeria's security issues, the major ones, usually start from the east and then they slowly move westward. Look at the kidnap epidemic, look at the insurgency in the Niger Delta, and then from the one in the southeast and then the one in the northeast, it will always spread westward, communal clashes and everything. So the Nigerian state has a very weak capacity as enforcing its will. Its borders are not safe, and so different armed groups, even domestic ones, collaborating with foreign armed groups, always wants to go for the jugular, and the failure to deter groups from taking or piecing away at government functions is enabling other terror groups to actually take up arms against the state.
Yeah. So you talk about northeast, northwest. Now we also have situations where this is not just secluded to the north; it's also in the south as well, southeast, and even here in Lagos, interstate, interstate. You've got these issues. Travelers are involved in all of that.
Absolutely.
What exactly are the differing motivations behind all of these abductions?
Yeah, as I said in the intro, it depends on where you are. So, for instance, the north is where the phenomenon of mass abduction started, at least in recent history with the Chibok girls. You had the motivation from Boko Haram to stop Western education, which they regard as a sin. And then it started with the attacks on schools, boys, girls, and the likes. But over the years, it has metamorphosed into this situation where people or armed groups have seen that it's a money-making venture. And no matter how much the Nigerian state comes on air or on TV, on the news to say, we don't pay ransom, at the end of the day, a ransom is negotiated. It may not necessarily be monetary value. If you recall what happened with the AK-9 train abduction in March 2022 in Kaduna, the abductors did not just get money. They also got some of the members of their groups, the disparate groups that collaborated to carry out the abduction, released from prisons in Abuja, high security prisons. So at the end of the day, what we've seen is, since the Nigerian state does not have the capacity to stop these things, he has resorted into a different way of managing the crisis, in which is to in a way to negotiate this way, even though he doesn't get to say it.
Then there's also the instance of these motivations being usurped by other bodies as well. Like, for instance, if you speak about the Boko Haram and their initial motive, which was religious.
Yeah.
However, we also had instances where ongoing people were factored in or people were implicated and their reasons were not necessarily religious. It was perhaps maybe in some cases political as well.
Yeah, I was getting to that. So by geopolitical zone, it differs. But one thing you should know is that the crisis has moved away from what used to be purely religious and ideological from Boko Haram to financial in many sense of respect. So in the southeast, for instance, the indigenous peoples of Biafra carry out kidnap. You understand? So their targeting is mostly centered around government officials, it's centered around security officials and the likes. If you come to the south-south, of course, you have the disparate gangs. What we discovered in the past few months is that these gangs that used to be mostly known for school gang violence have metamorphosed into adding armed robbery and kidnapping to their modus operandi. So it's financial. In the southwest, it's a similar stuff. But if you go to the north central and the northwest, it's now banditry mixed with religious ideology and opportunism. So when you look at banditry and kidnapping in the northwest and the north central, the people who carry it out, of course, some of them say armed gangs that belong to the Fulani extraction, they will tell you that they are resorting to this means of survival because the Nigerian states have taken away their means of survival, and some of them say the farmers have killed their cows and their cattle, so they did not have any other means of survival. So they are using this as a survival tactic and also as a revenge tactic. So you could also see it's political to some of these groups. So what you see is the further you go from one geopolitical zone, the motivations differ, but at the very wrong of it, what centralizes all of them is the motivation for finance. So all of them actually use kidnapping to raise funds for different purposes.
I'm really glad you just said that, right? Because in your report, right, it's about kidnapping, right, and it highlights the role of economic stability or instability, so to speak, and institutional corruption as key factors, deepening the kidnapping crisis. And one thing I want to ask is, what then are the measures, to mitigating these factors? I mean, economy is a long way from that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. In the past, whenever I'm asked this question, I usually say, "Oh, you have to fix the economy." Of course, it's true. Many people say, "Is the economy stupid?" But we have gone. I think we've gone further away from that solution. I think it's more of a long-term issue than a short-term issue. And unfortunately, on the long term, there is not really any hard measured way in which to actually count or measure if the government's program is actually working. So, but on the short term, the best the government could do is to increase its capacity at responding to threats. So in 2014, when the Chibok saga happened, the government came up with the Safe Schools Initiative. That was the general administration's idea of getting children out of harm's way, especially in volatile situations, and putting them in less volatile areas. But the government that came after that stopped the program until towards the end of its administration in 2022, 2023, and then it came up with it. But its implementation has been haphazard. So it wasn't until I think last week that we had the Kaduna State government saying they want to relocate about 359 schools away from areas that are prone to banditry and move them into safer environments. So there is that. You also look at the implementation of, or should I say, the improvement of the capacity of the police forces and security forces to handle these issues. In the past few years, we've seen the proliferation of vigilante groups that have been set up by the states to complement police efforts. But the problem we've noticed with these vigilante groups is the oversight function is very poor. The equipment function is very poor. They are not fully as resourced and equipped as the kind of expectations that's laid upon them. So, for instance, you have the community protection guards in, say, Zamfara or Katsina. All they do is collaborate with the police whenever they're going on a massive operation. They, on their own, cannot carry out these operations on their own because, in the first place, they do not have the kind of sophisticated arms that the bandits carry. And many other times, if you hear that so and so number of bandits are being killed, you find out that the nature or the way in which they are armed actually pales in comparison to how the bandits set out. So they are always easy targets. And it doesn't also help that the militia has largely withdrawn in terms of its spread. So since 2018, I think it was 2018, they developed the super camp strategy where it came under intense pressure by armed groups, especially in Northeast and in Northwest, and then it said that we need to minimize the way our personnel are being killed. So they were like, okay, we're going to create a super camp strategy where we're going to get holding and then go on periodic operations. But what that simply did was the areas where they used to control, especially in Northeast, they ceded that control to Boko Haram and the rest of that. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is this. State capacity, especially for the security agency, needs to be improved. People always say that Nigeria do not have intelligence to stop these attacks. I do not think that is true to begin with. Nigeria has a lot of intelligence to deal with this issue, but the problem is what they define as a threat and how they react to these threats before they occur is what makes the difference.
One of the things you said, which was very interesting, was that when you look at the trajectory of, the menace of insecurity and, kidnapping and all of this, it started from the east and south and, transferred all the way to the northwest. I never saw it like that until you described it.
Yeah.
And then if you now widen it and you're talking about all the way to mitigate it, in addressing it, what would the government in and of itself face in doing so? In just these factors that you've said, in highlighting a robust security system, the data is out there, but we just can't seem to harness it. We have the intelligence that we have, but institutional challenges might come into play.
Yeah, the first thing the government needs to find is the political will. I would say that the Tinubu administration doesn't really have security as its core focus as much as its eyes are on the economy. So it's largely, what he has done so far in the past 1 year has allowed the previous security institutions or the structures to remain without actually doing too much. So for what it can do better is, if you look at one of the causes why most security issues start from the east and then spread westward, you trace it back to the 1970s at the end of the Civil War. So what the Civil War did was to destroy the second economic corridor that runs from Port Harcourt to Maiduguri. So as a result, the people there have to move westward, and then the people that remain in that eastern corridor did not really have much to do, so they resorted to crime, kidnapping, banditry, and the rest of that. So that thing spread slowly westward. So I would say that if you want to tackle this problem at the root cause, you have to fix the second economic corridor. Currently, Nigeria has about 3, but only 1.5 is functional. That's the Western Economic Corridor that runs from Lagos to GBA and Katsina, and then the one from Lagos to Calabar, which is not as functional as the one in the West. So we are relying only on one. So the second economic corridor has to work. People have to have jobs. People have to see the economy working for them. So they do not have to see crime as a way of life. Because if you look at the kidnap statistics, the people who carry out these kidnappings are not elderly people.
No.
Nigeria's life expectancy is not that high enough for people that are old to carry this out. So what you have is a team of young people that do not see a future in the country carrying these things out. So if you go to a place like Adama and the rest of them, you see a 16-year-old kidnapping a 4-year-old, that's the child of its neighbor, and then it's killing the child because the best ransom it gets is 500,000 to that effect. So what can 500,000 do for a 16-year-old?
That you said that now.
Yeah.
And you've pretty much spoken about a fix-it for the situation. With the evolving nature of kidnapping in Nigeria, how has the Nigerian system itself evolved to try and tackle these different iterations of kidnapping? Have they at all, or is it one size fits all?
So it depends on what the security agencies are doing. I would say that in the past, kidnapping used to be an exclusive, the tackling kidnapping as a crisis used to be exclusive reserve of the police. Then we used to have the anti-kidnap squad of the police. Yes. But so far, I think since 2013, since the military got involved in Nigeria's internal security with the whole state of emergency thing in the northeast, the military has become more involved. So you are seeing, each time you put on the news, you're seeing joint security collaboration between the Nigerian army, the joint task force and everything. They are raiding one particular place in the southeast. They are seizing arms and seizing ammunition and everything. So it's like the whole of state apparatus is involved in this thing. But it's simply not getting better. It's simply not getting better. So what that tells you is that the problem has gone beyond the use of kinetics and the use of force. Because the more you use force, the more other people get attuned to the use of force, and then they adopt strategies.
Think that force is the right thing to do. I mean, even Nigerians as we are, we want to we like to shalaye. That's the term. We want to, we think that we have to force the hammer, and that's the only way it can work.
But then you've been using force for a long time. It hasn't really worked.
So what should be used?
Then? So it's
you already said observing the economy and using certain policies that can make people see future in Nigeria.
See, the best way to prevent an insurgency, the best way to tackle an insurgency is to prevent one. You understand? So what I mean is this: prevent these things before it happens. So we have the early warning systems for a lot of these communities. You understand? Say a community like Plateau, a community in Plateau, a community in Katsina, and the rest of this. The problem is that the people who are supposed to respond to these issues whenever they get the intelligence, do not respond on time. And apart from that, you have that on one hand. And the second issue that is wrong with it, apart from using force, is that dialogues were necessary to prevent some of these things from getting overblown. The state does not have the capacity to enforce this. I will give you an example. Look at Plateau, for instance. Since 2001, when the Plateau crisis started, we've had interfaith dialogues between Christian leaders and Muslim leaders. The federal government has been involved in these discussions. The state government has been involved in discussions. There have been agreements. But each time there's a flare-up, what you get to hear, the sides doing the flare-up will tell you that, oh, we had an agreement so and so years. This other side have not implemented it. The same thing that happened in Okwama in Delta State, the same thing that will happen in another place. So at the lowest common denominator, what you find is that agreements that the Nigerian government are parties to, especially when it comes to communal conflicts, ethnic conflicts, do not get implemented. So what happens is that the people who are supposed to implement that, the Nigerian government or the Nigerian state, they're supposed to enforce its will and say, this is the agreement. This land belongs to this particular community. National Boundary Commission reflect this in the next map update you're seeing. These oil wells, this community. This pond, this community. This river, this community. They don't do it. I remember 2 years ago, the then governor of Rivers State, Nyesom Wike, said that the Soku oil wells dispute that the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of Rivers State, the National Boundary Commission waited for bribes from the River State government to reflect it in its map. So these are some of the issues. So what I would say is this. If you have issues that could be settled by dialogue, do all your best to settle it by dialogue. If you have issues that could be settled only by force, you know that you have to settle that issue with force. Do not use force to settle things that could be settled by political dialogue, because the more you use force, the more people get resentful and the more people develop issues to bypass the use of force.
For the insurgents, the insurgency and the perpetrators of the insurgencies and also the bandits as well, we've seen the approach by the government towards those people. It's either rehabilitation, forgiveness, and reintegration. Do you think that also serves as a motivation for for people to want to commit to do this?
Yeah, there's that, because people who have criticized this program say that the government is just being taken for a ride and all of that. Yes, to an extent I will agree with them, but I would also like to give the government a little bit of credit. They have seen how in other places like in Colombia with the FARC rebels, how Amnesty have sort of resolved the issues or resolved the problem. But the issue with the Nigerian case is that some of these issues, like I was saying previously, is that Amnesty is not the silver bullet the Nigerian government thinks it is. I do think that what the government has done so far is implement amnesty programs and say, okay, surrender your arms. We're going to integrate you into whatever programs we are going to integrate you. If it is to join the Yansakai Vigilante group. But the thing is, the economy does not really work for these people. So whenever they come, they find that the government's capacity for ensuring their well-being and their survival is usually very low, which again comes down to state capacity.
Did Amnesty work when it came to the case of the Niger Delta agitators?
There you go.
To an extent, it did, but not totally, because what we currently have in the Niger Delta is a piece of a graveyard. So at any point in time, it could flare up. So what the government is basically doing is subsidizing the lives of the militants and their families. So at any point in time, if these payments dry up, there is going to be a problem. So to mitigate this, the past and the current government decided that they are going to put the security of the pipelines at the hands of the ex-militants.
My last question to you, Confidence. Do you have a stop button? Because you never stop talking.
I would have loved to have more conversation, and this time widening the scope into West Africa as well. Because I mean, your latest report that you put out in May, you put out all of the trends you were seeing in terms of insecurity, and I'm sure we're going to have that conversation. Insecurity in West Africa on a wider scale. But many thanks,
No problem. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
All right, now.